everyone. Welcome to the Ashley Barlow Company podcast. I'm Ashley Barlow, your host. If you are a parent, a teacher, or someone who works at a school, or you're a community member, a volunteer, or a staff member at an organization that supports people with special education plans, a coach, a tutor, or even a grandparent, you're in the right place. Sit back with an ice cold glass of lemonade, put on your walking shoes and grab some headphones, roll down the windows and cruise. Ready, set, go. Educate, advocate, collaborate. Hi, friends. Today is going to be great. I have Pete Wright on the podcast. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited to share Pete with you. Pete and I kind of talked about everything. At the end of today's podcast, we do a rapid fire. We talk about SLD eligibility, behavior, and inclusion. You are not going to want to miss Pete's straight up quick answers on those three topics. Pete and I also spend a lot of time talking about communication. And before we hop into this episode, I wanted to direct you to a free resource that I have on my website. It's at www.ashleybarlowco.com/resources. I have a freebie called 10 Super Simple Tips for Effective Communication at the IEP table. A lot of the things that Pete talks about in today's podcast are listed in this super simple freebie. There's also a freebie on the same page that talks about preparing for an IEP meeting. You should look at this checklist every single year before your annual meeting and any other time that your team is meeting. And finally, I just want to spend a second talking to you about a paid resource that's on my website. It's the Inclusion Workshop. If you head over to ashleybarlowco.com/shop, you will see an inclusion workshop that will knock your socks off. It's on sale today, Tuesday, November 17th, 2020, for one more day. It'll go up to $49 on Thursday. I really hope you'll download it. It is all things inclusion. I worked super hard on this. I'm really excited to deliver it, and it really lines up nicely with what Pete brings in this podcast. Let's hop into the podcast interview. You're going to love it. Welcome to the Special Education Advocacy Podcast with Ashley Barlow. I am so excited to introduce you to our guest today. I'm going to be talking to Pete Wright. Pete is an attorney who represents children with special education needs. Pete is one of the few esteemed attorneys to have given oral argument in front of the United States Supreme Court in a special education case. In 1993, Pete argued the Florence County School District 4 versus Shannon Carter case, which resulted in a victory for Pete's client, Shannon Carter. Pete also contributed to a brief in another Supreme Court case, Schaefer versus Wiest, which was in collaboration with the National Council on Disability. If that's not enough, Pete trained over 200 employees in the Office of Civil Rights on the interrelationship between IDEA, Section 504, and the ADA. Of course, the way most of my audience probably knows Pete is by his phenomenal books. I have two here. The rest of them are out on loan, but this is From Emotions to Advocacy, which Pete wrote with his wife, Pam Wright, as well as Wrightslaw Special Education Law, which Pete also has written with his wife, Pam Wright. Of course, there's also Wrightslaw No Child Left Behind, which was written in 2003, Wrightslaw IDEA 2004, there's Wrightslaw All About IEPs from 2009, Wrightslaw All About Tests and Assessments, which I probably open twice a week here in my special education law practice. And then he's got a year in review series with all of the case law. Pete is an avid reader of case law in all the different federal districts. And Pete has co-authored all of those books with his wife, Pam Wright. I refer clients to Pete's website, wrightslaw.com, on a near daily basis for organized, detailed information on all things special education. I first met Pete and Pam at the Institute of Special Education Advocacy Clinic, which is abbreviated ISEA, at William & Mary's Law School back in 2016. This is a week-long training for parents, attorneys, and advocates that really helped to transform and launch my special education law practice. I'm so grateful for Pete and Pam and their many contributions to the special education community. And I'm really excited to welcome Pete to our podcast today. Pete, welcome.
Well, thank you very much, Ashley. It's a great pleasure to be here with you today. And I am so impressed with what you have accomplished since you took the ISEA program. That was what, 3 or 4 years ago you took the program? And since then, you have become the guru in social marketing, getting information out to parents that's absolutely user-friendly, easy to understand, and taking difficult concepts and simplifying them so that they really make sense. I'm very impressed with the podcast that I have of yours that I have listened to and your interviews of others. Just awesome. Really, just great job. Very impressed. And thank you for having me today.
Thank you, Pete. That is the ultimate compliment. You know, it's such an honor to get to deliver this information to families that really need it. And I think, you know, you kind of set the bar, and you set the bar very high in getting information out to parents in an easy to follow manner in kind of layman's terms. And yeah, so I really—
Well, I'm going to share with you one thing that I really like that you do that is not done by many attorneys. And what you do is you put the information out there so that parents can understand it, and you empower them so that they don't feel the need to call their lawyer and ask them, what does the law say about this or the law say about that? Because you've already explained it, and you show them how to go forward with the information. And that was my whole theme as an attorney representing parents, to empower parents. It's a slower process. It takes a little longer, but in the end, it saves time for everyone, and the parents and the kids benefit down the road, because a lot of these issues in special ed come up again later on when the kids are in the 20s and have nothing to do with public schools, but have to do with dealing with other entities, and they duplicate themselves. And the lessons that you teach them how to deal with this and deal with that will serve them for many years. So your approach is very similar to mine. I really like that.
You know, Pete, thank you for that. And I had never really thought about it that way, but you're right. By learning how to advocate for your child in school, you're learning that advocacy for your child for their entire life. And then you probably take it even a step forward because you model advocacy, which then helps your child become a really great self-advocate. And that's really what it's all about. I tell my clients, I advise them under the shadow of the law, because that's really all I know is the legal framework. And I'm constantly thinking about what a court would do or what an administrative law judge would do. And I think there's a framework, you know, there's always kind of the best alternative and the worst alternative. And so long as we kind of hit someplace between those two parameters, and my client satisfied and the school satisfied, then I consider it a win. But you have to start with the framework of the law. So I appreciate that. That's really what it's all about.
Very good. Well, I like the way you do it.
Thank you, Pete. I learned from the best. So
this is a session in throwing compliments back and forth at each other.
We could go all day doing this, but
we can forget the audience. Just you and I will throw compliments at each other.
We'll just have a little compliment fest. You know, Pete, you could go really deep into any topic in special education, but and I certainly would welcome to have you back to do that on any topic, really. But what I'd like to do today is to kind of hit some hot topics. And so, you know, as we prepared for today's podcast, I gave you lots of different topics from lots of different places. And the reason I did that was because I feel like my audience could really benefit from some of those kind of Pete Wright one-liners. You know, you've got these great little paragraphs or page-long dissertations that you can give on some hot topics. And I find myself, having been to ISEA and then the alumni track in ISEA and having dinner with you a couple of times at COPA and stuff.
You took the training at Columbus too. You took that one-day training program, the 6-hour program.
Training in Columbus, which I would highly recommend to any attorney, advocate, parent that's out there, school staff, anybody. And so in doing all of those things, I've kind of got this like log of Pete Wright one-liners that I give to clients all the time. And So I thought it would be nice to have kind of your overview on some hot topics. So we've got 6 or 7 questions that we're going to tick through. It's not going to be super sequential, but I think let's get started, Pete.
Sounds good.
So the thing that I probably talk about most often when I'm looking for a Pete Wrightism is the letter to a stranger concept, because I really, as you indicated, I really like to empower my clients to represent their child, to advocate for their child themselves, and to do it in an organized and efficient manner that is within the framework of the law, and that's kind of always preparing for the concept that we might have to go to court. And so I would love it if you could kind of walk people through that letter to a stranger and what that concept is.
Alrighty. The letter to the stranger concept uh, came into being back in the days of CompuServe and the source. That's before this thing called Windows really came into being. It was right in the early years of Windows 3.1 and internet service providers. And on CompuServe was an organization called the ADD Forum. And there was a parent, and this was after I had the Supreme Court Carter case in '93. It was within, I guess, a few months after that. A parent sent me an email with a letter that they had written to the school, and they wanted me to give it give them its blessing that it was really a work of art and it was just a beautiful letter and so forth. And instead, my reaction was, oh my gosh, this parent has shot themselves in the foot with a machine gun and thinks they're doing the right thing, and they don't realize that they're going to close the door to services for their kids if this letter gets hand delivered. Uh, and on the forum was a professional author by the name of Janie Bowman, who was an expert in ADD out in Olympia, Washington. And so she and I got together and we ended up having, I guess, several telephone conference calls with the father and went through the story with him and got a good handle on the facts and had him rewrite his letter in a way that was a chronological narrative telling a story and did not blame or finger point. And instead, it generated feelings of empathy within the reader. And he then redid the letter and used that letter. And I hear back from him, even that was way back years ago. I hear from him even every so often, about once a year or so. I'll get an email from him telling me about what his son is doing now. His son went on and became an expert in computers, and he had done something with their computers in the school. That was why he got into trouble. He had hacked into the school's computers and changed people's grades and things like that. This again, this is the early '90s, so the kid was exceptional. And what we did then, Janie being a professional writer and I knowing about law, she created a web page or an article actually that was called The Letter to the Stranger. And she took his first letter and then the second letter and developed a story that both letters are lost in the street and in an envelope and found by a stranger. And the stranger reads that first letter. And by the end of that first letter, the stranger has no use for the father, feels lots of animosity toward the father and the child, and is really ready to help the school expel the kid for life and so forth. And then the stranger puts the letter down and then picks up the second letter and what's this? And reads it and says, oh my gosh! And by the end of the second letter, the whole thing has totally shifted. So the thing is that I tell parents, you have to write a letter and assume that it was lost in the street and found by a stranger who knows nothing about special ed law or the difference between IDA 504, ADA, or the difference between autism and learning disabilities. It's a blank tablet, and your job is within the stranger to create empathy. And human nature is such that if we're watching, let's say, a football game, and Thursday night football game coming up, and we know nothing about either team, and we really don't care about either team. We have no real interest in the outcome. And then the announcers keep talking about how they feel so bad for team A because of what happened to the coach coming down with cancer, and then the former Heisman quarterback ended up getting a compound fracture in the leg in last week's game, and the new quarterback has never even taken a snap in the NFL ever before, and starts telling all these horrible stories about this one team when they were expected to win, and now and you start to feel sympathy for the underdog. I mean,
Right.
that's human nature. We feel for the underdog. You start to root for the underdog, and that's what happens with a letter to the stranger. So when you attack and finger point blame, you end up causing the reader to feel empathy for the person you're attacking. Whereas when you tell a story in chronological order using visual imagery, that changed the whole thing. And I had all of my parents, when I had an active practice, and all of our law students, when we taught special ed law, they had to read 2 books. One was called How to Argue and Win Every Time by Jerry Spence. And they also had to read Getting to Yes, all about negotiation strategy. And those books are referenced in our promotions advocacy book. And it's all about marketing and sales, telling a story so that the person with power to change the outcome wants to go in your direction, wants to give you what you want. So that's the letter to the stranger. If the original letter to the stranger is on our website, if anyone that's listening goes to the Wrightslaw.com website and simply in the Google search engine in the upper right-hand corner, types in the word stranger. That's all I have to do. Just type in the word stranger, and you'll find the original letter to the stranger that was done by Pete Wright and Janie Bowman. And then you'll find a bunch of other letters to the stranger, ones that were in actual cases that changed the outcome of the case. There's one case I had in the Sixth Circuit up in your neighborhood,
Yeah.
the Joseph James case versus Upper Arlington, and had to do with reading recovery and how it damaged the kid who had dyslexia. And that letter case went all the way up to the Sixth Circuit, U.S. Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit. And those 2 of the judges on that panel knew the letter inside and out and asked me so many questions about the letter, and ended up reversing the lower court's decision and ruled in our favor and sent it back down for trial. It's a powerful technique. So to get a sense of it, just type in the word stranger on our website, and you'll see the important thing is you don't blame or finger point, but you tell a story using visual imagery, and don't have your own conclusions. Don't have any that my child has a bad attitude towards school because instead, when my child came home from school yesterday, he slammed the door so loud you could almost feel the house shake, and then he threw his books down on the floor, said he hates school, and he ran up to his room and slammed his room. And you don't have to say, my kid feels bad about school. In other words, you are describing visible, observable behavior so that the reader comes to that conclusion. You don't tell them the conclusion. You don't give it that word. The reader generates that. And when they generate that in their own mind and in their own stomach and in their own heart, then that goes up into the brain. In other words, I market and sell to emotions that hits them in the gut, goes into the heart, and then it controls the brain, how they feel and think and how they decide. And that's the whole key, getting the person to really go with you from an emotional perspective.
And the stranger then, Pete, becomes the judge, the administrative law judge, or that ultimate audience, right?
Exactly. When we write, when I had my parents write the letter to the stranger, I would tell them you have to visualize a nameless, faceless stranger. And because the letter is going to initially go either to the director of special ed or the school superintendent, but it's going to be exhibit number 1 if we go up on appeal to the United States District Court. And so the person that has the power to change outcome might just be the director of special ed. And you might win at that level, not to go any further. I had a letter to the stranger a parent wrote, and the letter closed with something to the effect that Pete Wright is representing us. It was a request for due process. Pete Wright is representing us, and we understand that a hearing officer has to be appointed within 10 days from the day of your receipt of this letter. At the same time, this letter is your authority to postpone appointment of a hearing officer if you believe it's worthwhile to contact Pete Wright and see if this matter can be discussed with him and resolved without a hearing. And so sure enough, 2 days later, I got a call from the director of special ed.
Right.
I'm going to exercise that option if it's okay and not appoint a hearing officer, and let's go out and have lunch. And I went out and had lunch with him and with the school board attorney. We had some glitches in it, and but eventually we prevailed. So in other words, it impacted the director of special ed. He saw the case from a different perspective from how he had seen the case previously. He told me, he said, I had no idea the parents had gone through this and had gone through that.
Right.
I wish I had known.
And I tell parents all the time when I'm advising them about the letter to a stranger, because I actually have them printed from your website. And what I tell them is, you're going to feel like you've told this story, but when you write it, you've got the opportunity to take the emotions out of it and to really tell the story in this different format that Pete really describes well in this document. And then you also have the opportunity to put it all in one place, to tell it in sequence in one place, so that it really tells the story. And it's not you going on a Monday and then going the following Thursday and then going 6 months later. It's all in one place. And really, we as attorneys and the director of special education and superintendent and the district's attorney, what we are lots of times looking for is what we're up against, how somebody would testify in court, what kind of documentation somebody's going to have in court, that kind of thing. And when they get something that's sequential and organized and really lays it out in that empathetic manner, they think, oh gosh, well, we better come to the table here with some kind of agreement, because we are up against somebody that really knows what they're doing. And that's effective advocacy. That's a good way to stay out of court. You're writing it in theory to maybe use as an exhibit, but as you say, Pete, the best way to stay out of court is to always prepare like you're going to court. And I think
That,
that's why it's so effective.
that's right. I mean, I told my parents that we have the best way to avoid, especially a due process hearing, is to assume it's going to happen and prepare for it, and that it's going to end up in federal court. Because if we win, I told my parents the school is going to appeal it to U.S. District Court. And if we went to U.S. District Court, they're going to appeal to the Fourth Circuit, and vice versa. If we lose at the first round, and I think we should go forward with it, I'm going to expect you to give me consent to file in U.S. District Court. And if we lose at the U.S. District Court, I'm going to expect you to give me permission, if I think it's worthwhile, to go forward to the U.S. Court of Appeals. And that's what actually happened in that James case. We lost it every single round. We lost it to due process. We lost it review. We took it to U.S. District Court. We lost there. We took it to the Sixth Circuit, and they reversed and sent it back. And so the best way to avoid trial is to assume it's happening and prepare for it, and you increase the odds it won't. You increase the odds of settlement. Totally.
Right. And that's a beautiful way to approach it. Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about communication, because that's kind of what I'm preaching all the time is communicate, communicate, communicate. And what I like to talk about is communicating throughout the year, not just at that annual IEP meeting, because, most families, I don't know if it's the majority statistically, but a lot of people tend to have on average one IEP meeting per year, just that annual one. Of course, if it's every 3 years, they've got a triennial evaluation, and then they might have 2 IEP meetings. But in general, people aren't having meetings, more frequently throughout the year. But I like to preach how important it is to communicate with the IEP team as a whole, various parts of the IEP team, the teachers, the related service professionals, etc. And I know you feel the same way. So can you elaborate a little bit on the importance of communication between parents and school throughout each school year?
That's really what it is all about. It's communication and relationships. When my parents had the ability to do it, and not all parents do, especially if you have a working family, and both mom and dad are working, but where you had the ability to do it, I would encourage my parents to get involved with the school, even doing do a home mother kinds of things or whatever else. Be regularly involved with the school, with the in that classroom, and drop by and have contact with the teacher, meet with them from time to time. And one other thing that I always had my parents do when they had an IEP meeting or a triennial or reevaluation session, or even just what is it, the meet the teacher night at school, bring food. Because, in sales, and again, I tell my parents, this is sales and marketing, and you are into persuasion. So when you bring food, that's what sales representatives do with all kinds of companies all the time. They take the person out to lunch, out to dinner, or they bring them for a treat. But when you bring food, there's something about that just changes dynamics. And it's hard to be angry at someone who is doing this. The other thing that, with regard to the communication, is that, as I said, I made my parents, they had to read these 2 books, one by Jerry Spence and also Getting TS. And the book by In Getting to Yes, it talks about how important it is for you to understand how they see the problem, what's their perception of the issue, and then what are their emotional beliefs, or maybe like just their intellectual beliefs. What are their beliefs about the issue, and what is it that they are afraid of if they give you what you want, and uh, what is it that what are their interests? What do they really, really want? So when you understand those four things from the perspective of the other person, you don't agree. You don't agree at all. They're dead wrong. But at least you understand, what their perceptions are, what their beliefs are, what their interests are, what their fears are, and you verbalize back to them. Now, I want to be sure that I have a clear understanding. This is what you are afraid of. This is how you feel about it. And if you nail it just right, you're right on the money with that. That reduces the polarization. Boom, just like that.
Yes.
All of a sudden, their mindset is, oh my gosh, she understands. We don't agree. We don't agree one bit, but she understands. Holy
Yes.
cow. And that changes dynamics totally. And that's a whole part of effective communications, because then they feel like, okay, we don't agree, but we are on the same page.
And then you build them that golden bridge. So you
Yep.
build them their retreat strategy because you identify what their interest is, what interest they're trying to protect. So often, and I think I talk to parents about cost all the time. Fine. If cost is the interest that they're trying to protect, we have to strategize around cost. We have to find them money. We have to articulate our knowledge of how they should be using the money. We have to address the money. It's okay if that's their thing. It's okay if it's not a super ethical or morally correct kind of thing in your opinion. That's your interest that you're holding. That's your value. But another interest that I think they hold a lot, Pete, that I have to talk to parents about a fair amount is teacher qualifications. They'll say, well, I think that they
Yeah.
don't have any confidence in their teacher. Okay. So then how can we strategize? What offers could we make to help to either empower that teacher or suggest a different teacher or a different program or, something else so that they can protect that interest? Because if they know they've got a teacher that isn't confident, or if they aren't confident in their teacher, we've got to do something to empower that teacher. And so I think that's a really important, I'm glad that you brought that up in communication, because I'm
Mhm.
constantly talking about getting to yes, because those concepts are that's the key to it, in my opinion.
It really is. I used to, before I had the Carter case, before I had the Supreme Court case, um, I had a general practice, and I did domestic relations work, and that's, of course, if I recall, you do that too, and
Yeah.
that's one of the most difficult, hardest, and the most emotional areas, in terms of both sides want to kill the other, and they both feel betrayed by the other. And there's a lot of similarities between special ed and domestic relations. But with domestic relations, I eventually became a divorce mediator, and as a divorce mediator, it the, what I found, I had a bunch of training. I had 40 hours of training, and the thing I found that worked, and this is what I was trained in, was you have to have each side verbalize to the other what their position is and why, and then have the other person repeat back what they heard. And the
Mhm.
first 3 or 4 times, of course, they're in left field. Each one is going in opposite direction. But
Right.
eventually, you'll say to the person, well, now, after they've said it about the third or fourth time, now, and the other person repeats it, is that what you're saying? Yes, I can't believe. Finally, it took a lawyer, a mediator, but now he or she understands what I'm saying. But you
Yes.
see that then all of a sudden the anger, the feelings of betrayal, the polarization starts to dissipate and go by the wayside.
You can
And once
understand
you get
it.
those,
Yeah.
once you get those four things out on the table, and the other person is able to verbalize where the opposition is coming from, and they're on the money, but they don't agree, but they're on the money, then the whole thing gets the emotions out of it.
So Pete, what I do in divorce cases, and I don't know if this is going to ring true in the Wright household, but on Monday nights, there's Monday Night Football and there's Dancing with the Stars. And Whoever planned that was really dumb because in a lot of households in America, that causes arguments. But I use that example to talk about interest-based negotiation because, like, and the reason I do it is because, everybody kind of fights for the TV room. So, like, I want to watch Monday Night Football. Well, I want to watch Dancing with the Stars. Well, I want to watch Monday Night Football. Who's more important, right? But if you ask the question, why do you need, okay, so now it's 2020, we have DVR. Why do you want to watch Dancing with the Stars? Well, because at work, at the water cooler, every Tuesday morning, we sit and we talk about Dancing with the Stars. Do you talk about Monday Night Football at the water cooler at 9 o'clock in the morning on Tuesday? No. Okay, well then you can watch Monday Night Football on Tuesday night on DVR. And I have this interest in this socialization that I get with Dancing with the Stars. And so we talk about like why there's an interest and how we can meet the interests with creative out of the box negotiation. And, it's silly. I've never had that come up in real life. My husband and I were probably arguing one day and I was like, I'm going to start using this.
I don't think that would work for you because I, looking at your photos of you on your website and the podcast, you are already dancing all the time, so you don't need to watch a TV show. And I suspect that what we were talking about beforehand and bicycle trips, that you're more inclined to want to watch Monday Night Football.
The football. You're right. I watch the football, and actually, I have a laptop on my lap anyway, so I don't really care what I'm watching. Usually by 8 or 9 o'clock at night, I'm diving back into work and ready to pass out. So you're right, Pete. That's kind of attendant to communication is parent advocacy. So that's your bread and butter. You have literally written the book on parent advocacy along with your beautiful bride, Pam. And so I think, kind of the question here, and you alluded to this in the beginning of our discussion, is why is it so important for parents to advocate? And I say that kind of with the caveat, Pete, that parents that have children in special education, even if it's not a medical thing, even if it isn't a developmental thing that takes a lot of time with therapies and that sort of thing, we all have this added stress. And a lot of us do have medical and developmental diagnoses that we're also treating with outpatient therapies and tutoring and worries and stress that come along with that. And so a lot of parents are simply overwhelmed. And yet I value parent advocacy. You've obviously built an empire on parent advocacy. And so I'd like for you to kind of elaborate on the importance of parent advocacy.
As you were discussing that, I had flashbacks into my practice, and too often what would happen is a parent would consult with me and initial consultation, and I would be going through, I'd gone through the file ahead of time. I'd always go through the file before I met with the parents. Parent would consult with me, and I would see that the kid was evaluated, we'll say 3 years, 4 years before, and the reading score, the kid was reading, had a standard score, we'll say of 85 in a reading comprehension. In other words, was down at the bottom 16%, and then was tested 3 years later, and now the standard score was 70. In other words, down at the bottom 2%. And I would be talking with a parent, and I would have seen that already prior to meeting with a parent, and I would go through the reason why they wanted to retain a lawyer, why do they want me involved in it, and probably on a large number of cases, their reason for consulting me with me really had nothing to do with the fact that the kid went from the 16% to the 2%. Had really fallen off the radar. I mean, just we've gotten much, much worse. They didn't see that. They didn't know that. And they were wanting to do battle with the school district on another issue that really wasn't as critical. And so then I would go through the test scores with them, and they would see that, and then I would actually teach them how to do the bell curve, and they would see that the kid had gone from the 16th percentile rank down to the bottom 2%, and their anger would kick in, and you could just see them getting so angry. I had no idea. Oh, and then they would shift. This would all happen very quickly. They would shift into, I am such a bad parent. I should have known this before. I just can't believe how bad a parent. And they look what they've done. And then it would shift over to anger and want to go on the attack for the school district. But they hadn't really done a very good job 3 years ago when the kid was first found eligible in understanding really what advocacy is all about, understanding the data and what to document, and then all of a sudden, boom, it's all hit. And so what parents have to do is you have to be the advocate for your kid from the beginning and really immerse yourself, because if you do it now when you first learn there are some issues, it's going to save you so much time later on. Because if you don't, if you let it slide now, and so many parents are so relieved when the school says, we'll take care of things, we'll take care of things. And Pam and I are doing some binge watching of the TV show called ER.
Oh, I
And
love that
yeah,
show.
and so many times there'll be someone wheeled into the emergency room, and Dr. Green will say to the patient, "You're in good hands now. We're going to take care of you. We're going to take care of you. Just take a deep breath, breathe slowly. We'll take care of you. Everything's gonna be okay." And I keep thinking, this is their mantra. They're always saying to everyone as they get wheeled in the emergency room, the blood's flowing everywhere, and oh, we'll take care of you. You're in good hands now with Dr. So-and-so. And that's almost how they open some of the initial contact between the doctor and the patient. And so many, I find so many parents buy into that. Now they know what's going on. Now we finally have an understanding of what's happening, and we don't have to worry about it anymore. And they let their guard down and they stop worrying about it. And then 3-4 years later, when they realize, oh my gosh, let my guard down, boom, things are so much worse now. You can't do that. You've got to step into the process, understand the process early on, and stay on top of it. And then you will not have to worry about it down the road. Hopefully, things will work themselves out down the road. Things will turn out great.
Yeah, and a key to that, Pete, is empowering yourself with information, which
Yes.
is why you wrote all those books, I'm certain, and it's why I've started this company, because as special education attorneys, we can only help so many people. I can only help so many clients, and I have to be physically with my clients in order to help them. So if parents take the initiative to buy some of your books, I mean, and I almost was flipping through while you were talking, but this might be my copy where I have the bell curve written, because
It should be on the last page of your FIDA book. If that was the one you had at the Columbus conference, the back count.
So that's what I'm wondering. I have so many different copies of it. I
No,
don't.
no, okay.
Nobody explains the bell curve better than Pete Wright does. And if you understand something as simple as the bell curve, if you understand something as simple as the continuum of placements in an LRE case or an inclusion case, or an alternative placement case on the other end of the spectrum, you then have the framework laid out that all you need is the advocacy skills in order to get what you think is appropriate for the child. Look, I just opened right to it. Here's one of Pete Wright's books with the bell curve. You think
Yes.
I opened this book?
And then go over 2 pages more, and there's an actual table that has the scores.
All of the percentage ranks, I guess. Oh yeah, here we go. Wow.
Page 96.
See, look at that. Now we're cooking, Pete. Yeah, but I mean, it's just the littlest bit of information. And that's why when we were talking before the podcast, I explained that when I do my video training courses, I explain them from a legal perspective. I go through the actual law, and then we go through the IEP and the laws that are associated with the IEP, because that's the only way that I know how to explain to parents what the child's rights are, what the parents' rights are. What an amazing place, what an amazing law that the parents actually have rights. I do divorce work, and they always say, well, I have rights to see my children. And I'm like, actually, the law is based on the child's best interest. You don't have a whole lot of rights as a parent. You have rights to get their medical records, but there aren't rights. But in idea, there are parent rights, which is really, really beautiful. But so many parents don't take advantage of them and don't empower themselves with information in order to do that. And, and then they do come to us frustrated and upset. And I understand that. And I always tell them it is extremely overwhelming. I get it. I was overwhelmed also as a parent at some point, and I'm an attorney and I was a teacher, so I really empathize with how overwhelming it could be.
Well, if a person has rights and they don't protect their rights, either for themselves or their child, don't expect a court to step in and protect them on your behalf if you were unwilling to do it earlier on. And courts will frequently make a reference to that. They had the right to do this, but they waived it by inaction. Thus, the court is not going to take a look at it.
Yeah, that's the value of you having read so many cases. Literally tens of thousands of cases have entered your brain, and you can assimilate information like that. That's a good point, Pete.
Yeah.
So I just was holding the book From Emotions to Advocacy, which you called the FIDA book. I'm forever going to call it the FIDA book now.
The blue cheese book, or what kind of cheese is that?
The FIDA book. Yeah, like feta cheese.
Right.
I love it. So Pete, what's the gist of how parents can successfully collaborate with the school team, part of the IEP team, without emotions? How do parents and school people communicate and collaborate, taking the emotions out of it?
The parent is the one that has to step up to the plate first on this. Many times parents will complain to me that Mr. Wright, you don't know my school district, and this is what they do, and they've been doing it this way regularly, and I have done this and I have done that, and they still do it. So it'd be a waste of time for me to try to do X, Y, and Z. And so then I'll say, well, oh, in other words, you're telling me no matter what you do, they're not going to change. No, they're not going to change. Not going to change at all. Well, then if they're not going to change, and you feel like you wasted your time, and so you're not going to change, how's the kid going to benefit? What's going to happen? It's just going to get worse and worse and worse.
Yeah.
And so I'll say to them, they may be in the wrong, but you are going to have to change the way you deal with them. Because most of the time when I see that, what the parent has actually done is they have gone on the attack to the school. They have hit them hard. It caused the school to put the defenses up, put the walls up, and they stay up repeatedly, and the parent is hitting their head against the wall. So parents have to shift. And I tell my parents, and generally what happens is when parents came in to see me, they were angry, and that anger spilled over at times in meetings, and school staff knew they were angry, and so there was distance and polarization. And so I would have to remake my parents' personality and image. And we'd literally do role playing in my office about how to become a merged personality of Mrs. Manners that had merged with the old TV show Columbo, Peter Falk being the actor, and also a little touch of Mother Teresa. And when they went to meetings and they projected this new personality, and when someone took the attack on them, they acted as if they didn't realize they were being criticized and attacked. They were acting, I tell them it's okay to act a little slow, that you don't quite get it, because then when you do that, they won't be expecting what's going to happen down the road, because they're going to lower their expectations. And it's okay to come across as you didn't realize you were being attacked, and you always smile graciously. You have that little Mother Teresa angelic look on your face. And what's going to also happen is when that person that you are upset about is attacking you, you know something? That's their personality in meetings. This is not unique to you. Many other parents, if you were to talk to them, will tell you the exact same thing about that person. And if you talk to other staff down the road when their defenses are not up, you'll discover that person is the same way. I had a case. I have to tell you about a case I had, a due process hearing, and it was being held at the middle school in the library, and I think the school might have been out that week, might have been spring break or something, and the principal was one of the ones who had really stirred the pot and made things bad. And there was several things the principal was supposed to have done with regard to the kid and the IEP and so on. And I had him on cross-examination, and I said to him, I spelled out X, Y, and Z, and you didn't do that, did you? And the only answer he could give was no. And then I went to the next one, and blah, blah, blah. And you didn't do that either, did you? No. And I went boom, 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 and about 3 or 4 things like that. And then I said, I have no further questions. And hearing officer asked opposing counsel, a follow-up redirect, no questions. The principal, this again was in his building, in his library. He got up, and this was in the evening, it ran late, it was about 8 o'clock in the evening. He got up and the setting was a conference room table, and he was at one end, hearing officer with the other, and attorneys on the sides. And the door was to his back. He got up, took his chair, slammed it down, went out the door, and gave it a forearm. It was one of these double doors that swing open. Gave it a forearm shiver. So they went bam, 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 and then he went out. And the hearing officer said nothing. Just there was silence. So the court reporter had nothing to put on the transcript. There was just silence for 30 seconds as the hearing officer just looked at the door, and then he turned to opposing counsel and said, "The hour is late. Do I hear a motion to adjourn for the rest of the day?" Opposing counsel, yes, sir. I moved, and I said, second the motion, whatever. In the case, adjourned, and that was it. And the next morning, next day, I had lunch with opposing counsel, and she said to me, "Pete, I loved what you did to Dr. So-and-so there last night just before the hearing ended." I said, what do you mean? She said, the way you just nailed him to the wall. Now, she is telling me how she loved what I did to her own witness.
Yeah.
And I said, and then she said, like, Pete, this is between you and me. We don't share this with your clients. It's just between the two of us. I said, that's fine. It's between us. She says, but you know something? He is such a horse's ass. I have to go to the board meetings with him at the school board, and also in central office. And he treats everyone like that he believes is beneath him. He is so demeaning to everyone. You know how he was to your parents in the IP meetings? He's that way to other building principals. I just can't believe why the superintendent hadn't fired him yet, because I was so pleased to see you chew him up and spit him out. That was so good. And that hit me, because I'd known about this guy. That was his style with other parents, but I had no idea that was his style with everyone in central office and the board meetings. And I realized then once I had that little insight, that as I looked at in future cases, and I had people that were like that, this is their style. And my parents would understand. This has got nothing to do with you. This is who they are. It's not you.
Right.
And when parents understood that, then their anger toward that person would go by the wayside, because that's the way he or she was with everybody.
Pete, I have had similar experiences where special education directors have kind of walked me to the elevator and said, "Thank you so much. You really helped me to provide guidance to the teacher, or you really helped to shed empathy on this situation that I think I've been trying to get my teacher to hear, and you framed it in a different way." And I think that's true. And really, sometimes with some parents, you have to lead by example in order for them to really understand how to do that. But the more we tell those stories, the more parents will understand that it, in many cases, is not personal.
Not at all.
So I'm looking, I want to have somebody, are you familiar with the Enneagram? It's like Myers-Briggs. It's a personality testing kind of profile thing. There's 9 different numbers, and your numbers, every person in the Enneagram methodology has a number, and then the number describes personality traits of yours. And I think it would be really interesting to have somebody come on the podcast and talk about Enneagram numbers and then communication at the IEP table. So, this person's a 4. If you're a 3, then you talk to this person this particular way. And, this is the way that they're going to receive your personality. Because I do, I'm really smiley and bubbly. And sometimes I have to come down and be more like, I'll wear a darker pantsuit, to come down and be more, logical and less kind of emotional and happy in a meeting, because of the way that somebody's going to receive my delivery. I say the same words, but I have to deliver them differently, and I have to dress differently, and that sort of thing. So I think that's really important, and that's what this whole book is about, is really kind of that advocacy style piece of it. Okay, so I I think we have time to just do, I thought we talked about this on the phone. I'd love to do kind of rapid fire through the 3 hot topics that happen in my practice. Do we have time to do it, Pete, you think?
Hit me with something.
Hit you with it. Okay, let's go. So I want to talk about 3 topics that are kind of hot topics. The first one being least restrictive environment. So parents oftentimes know that least restrictive environment is the mandate. They know that it exists. They know that there's this continuum of placement, but they don't really know how to use it to advocate. So can you give some quick tips on least restrictive environment?
Look at the statute. Read the statute. It explains that the child is to be educated. And actually, I had it out, so let me get it back in front of me. Here.
1412, right, Pete? 30 USC.
1412A5 in the statute. Let's see where, and it explains that to the maximum extent appropriate, children with disabilities, including children in public or private institutions or other care facilities, are educated with children who are not disabled, and special classes, separate schooling, or other removal of children with disabilities from the regular educational environment occurs only when the nature or severity of the disability of a child is such that education in regular classes with the use of supplementary aids and services cannot be achieved satisfactorily. So that means you also have to look at the definition of supplementary aids and services, which is in 1401. And those two make it clear what it is. And there's a regulation. It's that the next statute is in our book. And it's on page 7273 in the book, and in a footnote that we have. So we have a lot of footnotes in there. And in a footnote, we reference the federal regulation that the child is to be educated as close to the home school as possible, as close to home as possible. And so many people don't realize the impact of the supplementary aids and services and what has to be used. And there are a lot of cases out there on LRE, least restrictive environment. And so I would tell the parent, you don't want to go into the school and preach law. You don't want to go into the school and preach the statute. But you need to understand what the statute says. You need to understand what the case law says. Read some of the cases that are out there about it, and use the language without saying, quote, 20 USC 1412. Don't do that, but just simply use all those words. And so you're kind of marketing and selling that way. And that's kind of how to get the door open. And then I would frequently have, hopefully in a scenario of that sort, I would have an expert witness who would be able to talk about how the child adapts so well in regular settings with regular ed peers, and that placing the child into a setting away from, let's say, a self-contained setting, that is actually damaging and destructive to the child because of this, because of that. Because people don't want to be involved in damaging a child, even though they think they're doing what's right and what's best. But if you have an outside person come in and help them see how that is damaging, how it is destructive, how it damages self-concept and inhibits the kid's ability for growth and social acceptance and social awareness and interaction with others, when you have someone come in and help the IEP team understand that, then that's what markets and sells.
And the regulation indicates that we should consider any adverse effect that could happen in either setting. Also, I think that's 334 CFR 300.115 that indicates that. And that's that reg that has so much information that you probably referenced in that footnote. So yeah, that's how I do it. I love that. All right, so rapid fire, we're talking about.
So you wanted a one-liner response to a one-line question. Sorry, I gave you a book.
Oh, and then I talk back too. We aren't one-line people.
Okay.
Okay, so behavior. So lots of children are not supported behaviorally at school. And if they aren't supported behaviorally, then their academics are not going to work. They are going to have trouble accessing their functional skills. So if a child is not supported behaviorally at school, what are some quick steps that parents can take?
They would want to ask the school to convene a new IEP meeting. Prior to that, the parent needs to develop expertise in the IEP statute, and specifically the part that talks about special factors, and that's in the development of the IEP. It's in 1414 D3. And those two words, special factors, are key words in case law. Courts, a number of courts around the country, there's been a big shift that I've seen in the past 5 years in case law and behavioral problems. Uh, Courts are now saying that if the school district did not look at the special factors part of the IEP statute, and let me kind of read what it says, that the IEP team shall, it says mandatory, shall, in the case of a child whose behavior impedes the child's learning or that of others, they shall consider the use of positive behavioral interventions and supports and other strategies to address that behavior. So if the court finds that they did not pay attention to that statute or give it the time that it deserves, that means they didn't do an FBA, functional behavioral assessment, or they omitted some of the elements, the required elements of the FBA for that child. Thus, by either not having one or having an inadequate one, what flows from the FBA is the BIP, Behavioral Intervention Plan. So if the original data analysis of data, the FBA, is faulty, then the BIP is faulty. And if the BIP is faulty, then obviously the kid did not receive FAPE. And if the kid did not receive FAPE, then the school district has to provide compensatory educational services from way back when they did the first or failed to do the FBA. And the compensatory services is not an hour for an hour, but instead it's to make up for what the kid would have done. So it may well require, let's say, let me shift over compared to speech language. It's easier to understand. The kid was supposed to get an hour 3 times a week and didn't get it. Well, for a year. So does that mean the kid gets another hour 3 times a week for another year? Well, the kid fell further and further behind. So it may be 2 hours a week for 2 years. Who knows? So you have to do a whole new evaluation to determine how much. And it's not, and the school can't not determine the amount of compensatory aid. That has to be left up to the judge or the hearing officer. They've taken that power away from the school.
Only you could have done an entire behavior seminar in that amount of time. That was impressive.
I used to work in juvenile courts and juvenile training schools. I was a house parent and then later a counselor in juvenile training schools. I worked with kids that had behavior problems, even who had special needs and learning issues too.
I live with one. And that's like a whole year's worth of experience for people. That was impressive, Pete. Okay, so I know this one's near and dear to your heart. This is going to be our last thing of the day, and that is, I know, parents of children that have specific learning disabilities like dyslexia, dysgraphia, CAPD, SLDs. So they oftentimes struggle with eligibility. Before we even get into the IEP process, they have a really hard time getting their child's services to actually get that IEP. So what insight can you provide to help them get started on an eligibility discussion with their school?
Well, with the child with dyslexia, for example, if you look at the statute 1401, that's where all the definitions are. That's where the definition of supplementary services I talked about a few minutes ago. And the definition of a child with a disability is in there. And there's also a definition of a child with a specific learning disability. And in that definition, it has in there that it includes things such as dyslexia. So the word dyslexia has been in the statute since 1975 when the law was first passed. And what's happened is that way back since the beginning, and it still continues to this day, that there are some school districts that take the position that we don't recognize dyslexia as a disability. It's a medical condition, or come up with some other thing, but it's been in the statute since 1975. But I tell parents, don't get caught up in that battle because you're going to end up fighting a battle over issues of labels and not issues of educational needs. And you have to focus on what does your child need. Well, with dyslexia, the child will typically need structured literacy programs such as in Gillingham or Lyndon Bell or Susan Barton, and you talked about that in depth in one of your podcasts. I thought that was exceptional what you did there and how you explained that. And shift the focus over and say, well, regardless of what we call it, we know my child has severe problems with reading. And it might be manifested in the typical reversals of this, or you was and saw, letters P, B, D, and Q, those kinds of things, or left, right, or it might be more a dysgraphia kind of dyslexia where it's written language issues and the kid's language is all over the place, or even dyscalculia with arithmetic issues. And if you want to see if a kid has got some issues with dysgraphia, dyscalculia, ask the child to do a long division problem. I used to do that with kids in my office regularly. I said, let's see how you are. How good are you with arithmetic? Oh, okay. Well, what's 5 times 5? 25. Okay, very good. 10 times 10, 100. Okay. And then I'll ask them a few more. And then I'll say, here's a piece of paper. I want you to go ahead and do a long division problem for me, and I'll make a simple one at first. And then I'll say, okay, now I want you to divide 1, 2, 3 into 4, 5, 6, 7. And that's where you see it, because when they do that, then everything slants this way. Numbers, the 9s and the 6s get shifted or rotated. And that's where you'll see a merger of dysgraphia, dyscalculia. And some people would say that's all part of the syndrome of dyslexia. And others would say, no, they're separate, independent. I don't care whether it's a merger of one. What's the educational needs of the kid? That's the issue for me. And so then we have to focus on getting really good quality remediation of sorts. And what's so sad is that so many times I have found educators, even parents, believe, well, my kid has dyslexia and my child can't read. Well, why can't your child read? Mr. Wright, I just told you, because my child has dyslexia. That means my child can't read. No, I don't believe so. Oh, yes. And there's one of our letters to the stranger is the Brody letter to the stranger. The child was going into high school level, and the parent wanted me to force the school to provide an aide to sit beside the child in all high school classes to read what the teacher wrote up on the board and read the textbooks. And then the kid would dictate the answers to the person. The kid had never been taught how to read and hadn't been taught how to write and had an above average IQ, well above average.
Right.
And the parent was fighting for an aide. I said, that's the wrong issue. Your kid needs to learn how to read, write, spell, do arithmetic. And we ended up getting the youngster into landmark school.
Right.
And the kid ended up going to college and doing great.
Yeah.
And he even on our website is a story he wrote, the story of sitting beside his lawyer during the due process hearing, James Brody. And that's fascinating. But so the belief is, well, we're going to support the child, provide modifications and accommodations, and we're going to give the kid talking books. We're going to read everything aloud. We're going to lower the kid's anxiety. Man, what you are really damaging the kid with that approach. Teach the kid how to read, write, spell, do arithmetic. And so that's the focus. What has my kid got to learn to be able to make it in the real world with reading, writing, arithmetic, and spelling skills?
Yeah, and you can do that very easily with an expert. So get an IEP and go and then bring the person that did the IEE, the psychologist or whoever, into the meeting to describe that. And that is usually a really successful strategy. That's how I do it too.
Well, and one other thing, so often I have found that a parent may be focused on if the child has cerebral palsy, child has autism, has Down syndrome, and the kid can't read.
Right.
Wait a minute. Yes, you can be taught. And I remember a parent in a northern part of Florida who had learned all about Orton Gillingham and had a child with Down syndrome. And she hired an Orton Gillingham tutor for her child. And this was like 15 years ago. And the kid was reading on age and grade level. And the school district couldn't believe it.
Oh, that's awesome. You know, as a success story relative to that, my educational degree is in German, K-12. So I did not teach, elementary school, but my mom was a teacher. I always wanted to be a teacher. So I just kind of get pedagogy. And since my child's been home, we're recording this in November of 2020. So it's still in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic. And so my child's been home largely since March. and with one-on-one instruction that is extremely consistent, has a lot of repetition, and I can frame it just for him. You know, I've written books about his experiences. His reading has skyrocketed.
Mm.
And I'm not using, I actually bought Linda Mood Bell and tried to train myself, but it doesn't really suit his profile because it's so question based, and he needs somebody to direct him how to do it instead of explore it on his own. But he is just flourishing in this kind of wonky thing that I've done that isn't research based. It's multisensory, but it's really going beautifully because I've just kind of looked at what works and I take data. And if the data doesn't show improvement, then we switch up our strategies. And so, yeah, that's the way I do it for SLDs also. And I agree. I don't really care what the diagnosis is. I care about how I can help the child.
That's right. That's right.
Aids we need or what kind of SDI we need to get for the child.
I've had some parents go through the Susan Barton training,
Mhm.
and they end up becoming their kid's Barton tutor,
Yeah.
and just and had everything to 180 degrees, and kids taking off.
Right. And they just rip through those Barton books, which is
Yeah.
so exciting. That's awesome. Pete, you are such a fabulous resource to the special education community, parents, teachers, community members alike. You've shared a lot of your information as to how people can reach you. Obviously, there's Wrightslaw.com. Is there any other resource that you want to share?
I am not up to speed as you are with things like Facebook and all these other things. I'm trying to get up to speed on it, but I can't. I really can't think of anything else off the top other than through our website. And it's not that I'm in a position where I can provide really good advice to a parent who has a presenting problem, because I find so often when I do get an email from someone who's got an issue and they want me to give them direction on it, well, it's like that parent that contacted me in the Brody parent, Ms. Brody, and she wanted an aid for her kid going into high school. And that was the wrong question. And I find so many times that the question and the direction parents are going in is the wrong question and the wrong direction, but I won't know that until I go through the kid's entire file. And in that scenario with Brody, I mean, I went through the kid's entire file and I saw the kid was evaluated way back in second or third grade, had a high IQ, but was found eligible because of learning disability and reading, and yet they didn't teach him how to read. And so I find that I'm almost reluctant to give advice because a parent may go off in that wrong direction because I don't know all the facts. And to me, that becomes malpractice by me. If I don't know all the facts, it's like I'm a doctor, you know, and you got a stomach ache, and I tell you go home and take some Alka-Seltzer and ibuprofen if Alka-Seltzer doesn't work, you know, and I don't do any lab work, any blood work, you know, I mean, that's malpractice out of its face. I feel
this, you know, I get messages this, and I do the same thing, but you've got that behemoth of a website that we've referenced, Wrightslaw.com. That is such a wonderful resource, as are all of the written published materials. And Pete, I think it's also worth mentioning that any of my audience would like to have you come do a training, that you do trainings, particularly when it's safe to travel. And I would endorse any of those, as well as that ISCA seminar. So I thank you for being here. You're such a wealth of information. And
yeah, I got to give kudos to you though. Your website and the material you have on there is awesome. I'm really impressed. I'm very serious. I was so impressed, and I've listened to a bunch of different podcasts. I said, my gosh, why do you have me when you have this stuff down so cold yourself? Why do you have me talking about it?
oh my gosh, I'm gonna be dancing all day. That's the ultimate.
Oh, the too many photos. I mean, not too many. You do a great job on the website. You're dancing.
There's a lot of pictures of me. I agree. There's a lot of pictures of me. All right. Well, thanks.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I enjoyed it thoroughly.